Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back, way back, into a world where central heating was just a fever dream and a thick blanket was your best friend. We're visiting a medieval home on a truly brutal winter's night. You probably won't survive without a good imagination. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where and what time you're tuning in from. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The air around you isn't just cold, it's an active, malevolent force. You feel it pressing against your cheeks, already numb, and sneaking icy tendrils down the collar of your rough-spun tunic. No matter how tightly you've pulled your cloak, each breath you draw is a sharp, crystalline shock to your lungs. A reminder that this world, this medieval night, is not particularly concerned with your comfort. It's the kind of cold that feels like it's seeping into your very bones, making your joints ache with a dull, persistent throb. You've been traveling for what feels like an eternity, though the darkness makes time a slippery, unreliable thing. There's no friendly glow of streetlights here, no reassuring hum of distant traffic, just the oppressive blackness of a moonless, star-choked sky, and the relentless, mournful howl of the wind as it whips across the frozen fields. You can hear the snow, not falling softly, but driven almost horizontally by that wind, hissing and stinging any exposed skin. It's like tiny needles, a constant, irritating reminder of the night's temper. Underfoot, the path, if you can even call it that, is treacherous. One moment, it's the squeaking crunch of compacted snow. The next, your foot slides on a hidden patch of ice, threatening to send you sprawling. You're pretty sure your medieval GPS, which is to say, vague directions from a half-frozen farmer you passed hours ago, has led you astray. Or maybe it's just that every clump of skeletal trees and every snowdrift looks depressingly the same in this gloom. You miss your heated car seats. Don't you? Yeah, me too. This kind of cold makes you appreciate the simple, often overlooked luxuries of modern life. This isn't just a chilly evening. It's a deep, unforgiving winter that has gripped the land for weeks, maybe months. It's a well-documented fact that many parts of Europe during the medieval period experienced significantly harsher and longer winters than we're generally used to. Sometimes referred to as the early stages of the Little Ice Age, this wasn't just inconvenient for planning your weekend jaunt to the next village. It could be a death sentence, affecting everything from crop yields, which were already precarious, to the ability to simply move from one village to another due to impassable, snow-clogged roads. Forget checking your weather app for a 5-day forecast. The best you'd get is an old man squinting at the bruised-looking sky and sagely informing you. Looks like misery, son, with a side of impending doom for the turnips. As you trudge onward, shoulders hunched against the biting wind that seems to find every tiny gap in your clothing, a flicker of something catches your eye. Not light, not yet, more like a slight disturbance in the uniform, suffocating darkness ahead. A shape, perhaps, a little blacker than the black sky, a subtle interruption in the desolate horizon. Hope, a fragile, shivering thing you'd almost forgotten you possessed, stirs within you. Could that be it? Could that be the dwelling you've been seeking? The refuge promised by those vague directions? Your pace quickens, or at least you attempt to make it quicken. Your legs stiff and unwilling, protesting with every step. The profound cold has made you clumsy, your movements leaden and uncoordinated. And then, a faint, almost imperceptible smudge of orange yellow. It's weak, a tiny spark battling the overwhelming darkness, but it's undeniably there, a light, and with it, the faintest, thinnest wisp of smoke. barely visible against the inky canvas of the sky, torn apart mercilessly by the wind almost as soon as it escapes its chimney, or, more likely, a simple, unadorned hole in the roof. That's the sign you've been praying for, or at least muttering hopeful incantations for. Shelter, warmth, or at least something less brutally, existentially cold than this exposed, wind-lashed nightmare you're currently starring in. The anticipation is a peculiar mix of profound relief and a simmering trepidation. You know, deep down, it won't be a 5-star resort waiting for you with fluffy towels and a minibar. The concept of a cozy medieval cottage is largely a romantic invention for beautifully illustrated children's books and, well, tourist brochures. Still, at this point, anything is better than this. Anything that offers a barrier between you and that relentless wind. As you draw closer, the outline of a small and hunched structure gradually solidifies from the gloom. It's low-slung, built of rough-hewn timbers jammed together and what looks like wattle and daub, dark and rather forbidding. Snow is piled high against its windward side, drifted almost to the eaves of the thatched roof, which itself is laden with a thick, pristine white blanket, muffling any sound from within. It looks less like a home intentionally built by human hands and more like a natural formation, a part of the frozen landscape, something that has grudgingly surrendered to the winter's siege. There are no welcoming lights spilling from multiple, cheerful windows, just that one. Solitary flicker, probably escaping from a poorly shuttered opening or a stretched animal hide. You can easily imagine the occupants huddled inside, doing their very best to ignore the raging storm, much like you're desperately hoping to do in a few moments. You finally reach the door. It's a heavy, planked affair, made of dark, weathered wood, visibly scarred by countless seasons of similar abuse from the elements. There's no doorbell, naturally, no ornate knocker that you can discern in the dimness. You hesitate for a moment, your breath misting thickly in front of your face. What awaits you on the other side? A grudging welcome from strangers. Suspicion, or just the weary indifference of people who are also just trying to survive the night. You raise a heavily gloved, numb hand and knock, the sound startlingly loud in the sudden, brief lull of the wind, then almost immediately swallowed by its returning. Furious roar. There's a shuffling sound from within, muted by the thick walls and the storm. A voice, indistinct, perhaps a question or a curse. Then, the distinct, laborious scraping of a wooden bar being lifted from its brackets. The door groans open a crack, not smoothly, but with the reluctance of old, damp wood. It releases a puff of air that, even in its brief escape, feels marginally less hostile than the gale you're currently enduring. It's not exactly a warm hug of air, more like a slightly less aggressive handshake from the Arctic. The scent that wafts out is complex, wood smoke, definitely, sharp and acrid, but also damp earth, the undeniable aroma of unwashed bodies, perhaps the lingering ghost of stale food, and something vaguely, primally animal. It's the authentic perfume of medieval life, ode to survival, if you will. You push the door open further, stepping across the raised threshold. These were common in medieval homes, designed ostensibly to keep out the worst of the drafts, rainwater, and, amusingly, some say, unwelcome supernatural visitors or evil spirits. Historians still argue whether such features were primarily practical architectural choices or deeply rooted in the era's pervasive superstition and folklore. But tonight, you're just profoundly grateful for anything that might keep even a fraction more of the biting cold at bay, be it spirits or just a particularly nasty gust of wind. It's a quirky little tidbit from the past that some folks firmly believed ringing church bells during a violent storm could not only drive away the tempest itself, but also scatter the malevolent entities and demons thought to ride upon its winds. Tonight, frankly, you'd settle for a well-stuffed sausage skin wedged into a window crack if it promised a bit more warmth. The space you step into is dim, very dim indeed. The only significant light source appears to be a small sputtering tallow candle perched precariously on a distant, rough-hewn table, and the faint, ruddy glow emanating from a central hearth, where a few embers struggle valiantly to maintain their cheer against the encroaching cold. It's a stark, almost shocking contrast to the brilliant, even if terrifying, darkness outside. Here, the darkness is softer, more intimate, filled with elongated shadows that dance and writhe with every flicker of the meager light sources, making the corners of the room swim in and out of focus. Your eyes struggle to adjust, slowly making out vague shapes: a rough wooden table, some low, three-legged stools, bundles of what might be straw or rudimentary bedding piled in a far corner. The meager warmth you anticipated is, well, meager is definitely the operative word. It's less warm in any modern sense, and more, not actively, immediately freezing your extremities off. The air inside is thick, heavy with smoke that stings your eyes slightly, and redolent with all those scents you caught at the door. But it's shelter. It's inside. And for this moment, after the brutal cold, that's everything. And so, you find yourself seeking shelter. But the very concept of shelter in this era is, shall we say, a wonderfully flexible term. Let's turn our attention, very, very slowly, to the walls around you. These supposed guardians against the relentless winter wind. These are the walls that breathe drafts, sighing with every gust, and generally doing a rather poor job of keeping the outside, well, out. Many homes, especially those belonging to the common folk, the everyday souls trying to eke out an existence, are constructed using a method known charmingly as wattle and daub. It sounds almost pastoral, doesn't it? Wattle. Daub. Like the names of two particularly fluffy sheep you might encounter in a sun-dappled meadow. The reality, as you huddle within such walls, is a touch less idyllic. You see, the wattle is essentially a lattice, a framework of upright wooden stakes interwoven with thinner, pliable branches or reeds, rather like a very rustic, very gappy garden fence. Then comes the daub, a lovingly prepared concoction of wet soil, sticky clay, perhaps some sand if it's available, a bit of straw or animal hair for binding, and often, for that special, earthy aroma, and, presumably, some structural je ne sais quoi. Animal dung. This mixture, this medieval pâté, is then plastered, or rather, daubed, onto the wattle framework, on both sides, if the builder was feeling particularly ambitious, or if the owner had an extra half penny to spare. Now, when this daub is freshly applied and has had a chance to dry in the faint warmth of a medieval summer, it might present a facade of solidity. It might even, for a fleeting moment, trick you into believing it's a proper wall. But winter, with its icy breath and persistent damp, has other plans. The wood of the wattle, often unseasoned, shrinks and warps in the fluctuating temperatures and humidity. The daub, bless its humble, earthy composition, cracks. It doesn't just develop polite hairline fissures. It spawns a network of miniature canyons, little pathways for the wind to explore. These gaps can grow, flake, and crumble, creating small, persistent drifts of dried mud and dust on the floor. And through these myriad imperfections, the wind doesn't just whisper, it positively howls. You can sit there and physically trace the path of a draft with your outstretched hand, feeling its cold, invisible fingers snake across the floorboards, climb your legs, and deliver a surprisingly intimate, icy kiss to the back of your neck. It's as if the house itself is alive, breathing deeply, But instead of life-giving oxygen, it's inhaling pure, unadulterated, bone-chilling winter. Insulation, as you and I understand it, is a concept from a far distant, almost magical future. These walls are less a barrier against the elements and more of a very enthusiastic sea-eve. Then you have the timber-framed houses, which, on the surface, sound a good deal more robust. A step up in the medieval property ladder. And in many respects, they are. These are the classic, picturesque buildings you often imagine, with those strong, dark wooden beams forming the structural skeleton of the house, visible both inside and out. It's a mainstream historical fact that timber framing was an incredibly prevalent method of construction across vast swathes of medieval Europe, a direct result of the abundant forests and the remarkable skill of medieval carpenters and woodwrights. The spaces between these substantial timbers, the panels, are then filled, often, ironically, with more wattle and daub, or perhaps with bricks, lath and plaster, or even nogging, if the owner is trying to make a statement, or simply has access to better materials. But here's the catch. The little secret these handsome beams try to hide wood, especially the green, unseasoned timber that was frequently used for speed and cost-effectiveness in construction, is a living material. It moves. It twists and warps as it slowly dries over years. It shrinks in the dry cold of winter and swells in the dampness of other seasons. So, those joints that once seemed so perfectly snug, where the mighty vertical posts meet the horizontal beams, or where the infill panels nestle against the wooden frame, they begin to loosen. Gaps appear, not charming, rustic little crannies, mind you, but veritable highways for the wind. You might be lying on your straw-filled mattress, trying to coax some warmth into your chilled bones, and you can actually see the dim, gray light of the pre-dawn sky, or perhaps the flickering of a distant star, peeking through the join where the wall meets the eaves of the thatched roof, or where one massive timber has decided it no longer wishes to be quite so intimately acquainted with its neighbor. It's like residing inside a loosely assembled, very large, and rather creaky puzzle box, and the sounds, the symphony of groans, creaks, and pops as the timbers strain and settle under the constant pressure of the wind. Each powerful gust that buffets the house is a stark reminder that, solid as it may appear from a distance, this structure is engaged in a perpetual, subtle wrestling match with the forces of nature. Sometimes, the wind will find a particularly well-formed gap and whistle through it with such a specific, high, unhappy pitch, you could almost mistake it for a very mournful, very out-of-tune medieval flute playing a lament for lost warmth. Not exactly the soothing soundtrack you'd choose for a restful night's sleep. You'd imagine they'd try to stuff something into these breaches. And indeed, they often did. Here's a quirky, lesser-known tidbit, for you people would frequently resort to stuffing dried moss, bundles of old leaves, or even tattered rags and bits of wool into the more egregious gaps in a desperate, ongoing battle against the cold. A for effort, one supposes, but perhaps a C- for long-term effectiveness against a determined Northumbrian gale. And what if you happen to be among the more fortunate, dwelling within walls of stone? Surely stone signifies permanence, impenetrability, a veritable fortress against the biting cold. Well, yes, and not entirely. Stone is undeniably more formidable than wattle and daub, or even timber framing. It doesn't exactly breathe drafts in the same enthusiastic, porous way. Instead, stone has its own unique method of making you uncomfortable. It radiates cold. Unless you are a high-ranking noble or a wealthy merchant, with every single wall surface lavishly draped in heavy, insulating tapestries, thick as a modern duvet. And even then, it's a battle. Those thick stone walls, entirely uninsulated as they are, become enormous cold sinks. They slowly, inexorably absorb the frigid temperature from the outside air and then gently, persistently release that chill into your living space. You can lean against an interior stone wall on a winter's day and feel the damp, penetrating cold seeping right through your layers of woolen clothing, into your muscles, into your very bones. It's a deep, gnawing chill that no amount of wishful thinking or vigorous shivering can truly dispel, and even these stalwart stone walls possess their vulnerabilities. The mortar binding the stones together can degrade over time, crumbling under the relentless freeze-thaw cycles of many winters, creating tiny, insidious cracks for drafts to exploit. Windows, if you are privileged enough to have them glazed with horn, greenish glass, or even oiled parchment, are rarely, if ever, well fitted. They rattle in their liege cames or wooden frames, a constant, nervous percussion accompanying the wind's song. And doors. Oh, medieval doors are practically open invitations to the elements. They are typically heavy, planked wooden affairs, often warped by damp and age, fitting with a kind of casual imprecision into their frames. You could probably slide a small very flat and exceptionally determined ferret under most medieval doors, which, now that you think about it, might account for some of the unexplained scuttling sounds you hear in the dead of night. So, even within a supposedly sturdy stone dwelling, the wind, that unwelcome and persistent guest, always finds a way in. You'll find yourself engaged in a constant, restless ballet of avoidance, trying to locate a single spot within your home that isn't directly in the path of one of these invisible, icy currents. You might strategically reposition a meager piece of furniture, a wooden chest, perhaps, or a rickety stool, in an attempt to block the worst of the incoming chill, only to find the draft cleverly detouring around your makeshift barricade with infuriating ease. Historians still argue whether the persistent drafts were seen entirely as a nuisance, or if some level of airflow was considered somewhat necessary, albeit uncomfortably achieved, for adequate hearth ventilation to prevent the entire dwelling from slowly filling with eye-watering smoke from that central fire pit we know is burning fitfully nearby. It's a rather charming dilemma when you ponder it, isn't it? The delightful choice between slowly freezing in a constant breeze or gently kippering yourself in wood smoke. It's your very own medieval smart home, where the walls automatically adjust the indoor climate to ensure maximum, well, let's call it atmospheric authenticity. It's precisely the kind of authenticity that fosters a profound and lasting appreciation for every single modern window seal and strip of insulation you've ever encountered. The very notion of a sealed home, an airtight environment shielded from the caprices of the weather, is utterly alien to this time. Every significant gust of wind that howls outside your dwelling translates almost instantly into a dozen smaller, colder, more intimately invasive breezes inside. You hear it whistling and sighing around ill-fitting window shutters, if you are fortunate enough to possess such luxuries, or hissing through the stretched animal skins or greased linen that might serve as a more common and far more permeable window covering for the average person. You feel its cold caress on your face, a constant, unwelcome reminder of the vast indifference of the outside world to your personal comfort, especially as you try to drift off to sleep. It carries with it the distinct odors of the medieval night, the heavy scent of damp earth, the sharp, acrid tang of wood smoke from a neighbor's struggling chimney, the faint, almost metallic promise of snow that is undoubtedly making its way towards you. These walls, you realize, aren't merely passive boundaries. They are active participants in the weather, porous membranes that permit the outside world to enter with very little fuss and a great deal of chilly, unwelcome enthusiasm. Forget double glazing. You're considered fortunate if you're single, often rudimentary. Glazing doesn't simply shatter or fall out during a particularly violent storm. In essence, you might as well be living in a very elaborate, slightly more substantial, and significantly more drafty tent. And you pay for this distinct privilege, not in coin or barter, but in an unending currency of shivers, sniffles, and a deep-seated longing for a truly warm corner. And as your eyes adjust to the gloom inside this, let's call it a cozy fixer-upper that we found ourselves in, your attention, and indeed your whole being, is drawn inexorably towards the very heart of the space. Not a metaphorical heart, mind you, but a literal, pulsating, smoky. One, the open hearth. It's right there, probably in the center of the main room, or perhaps against one of the less drafty walls, if such a thing even exists here. Forget your sleek, minimalist fireplaces or your efficient wood-burning stoves. This is primal technology. A shallow pit, maybe ringed with a few carefully placed stones, or perhaps just a designated patch of well-trodden earth, bravely attempting to contain the flickering. Hungry flames. This, you quickly realize, is the command center, the engine room, the everything station of the home. Its importance cannot be overstated. First and foremost, this is where your dinner, and every other meal, comes from. You can see it now, a large, soot-blackened cauldron, suspended precariously from a greenwood pole or an iron chain, bubbling away with something. Let's hope it's something vaguely stew-like. The aroma, a complex bouquet of wood smoke, simmering herbs if you're lucky, and perhaps a hint of damp wool from your own clothes, fills your nostrils. You might see a flat griddle stone heating to one side, ready for some coarse bread, or perhaps a fish, if the local river was feeling generous, sizzling directly on the embers. There are no temperature dials here, no timers, just an intimate, often fraught, relationship between the cook and the fire. It's an art form born of necessity, a constant negotiation with heat that's either too fierce or threatening to die out altogether. You'd need to learn to read the flames, the glow of the embers, the very mood of the fire, to get anything edible out of it. And forget about a smoke alarm. The entire room is the smoke alarm, constantly, gently, reminding you of its presence. Now, let's talk about warmth. Because after the promise of food, that's the hearth's next big draw, especially if you've just come in from that biting wind we were discussing. You shuffle closer, instinctively. Ah, yes. There it is. A wave of heat washes over your shins and your outstretched hands. It's intense, almost scorching, right at the fire's edge. You feel your skin prickle. Your chilled fingers begin to thaw, and a small primal sigh of relief escapes you. But here's the rub. Quite literally, take one step back, just one, and the embrace loosens dramatically. Take two, and you're practically back in the cold zone. This isn't central heating. It's extremely localized heating. The heat radius is laughably small. You'd have to huddle, really pressing close with anyone else sharing this space, to collectively bask in its glow. One side of your body roasts, while the other remains stubbornly convinced it's still midwinter. It's like standing too close to a bonfire on a chilly night. Your face is aglow. Your back is freezing. You can imagine the constant shuffling, the turning, like human rotisseries, trying to get an even distribution of warmth. The far corners of this room, they might as well be in another climate zone altogether, drafty and dim, touched only by the deepest chill. And speaking of dim, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the smoke in the room, because it is everywhere. You see, the charmingly rustic design of this dwelling, as we've noted, often omits such modern luxuries as a fully functioning chimney. Oh, there might be a hole in the roof, a sort of optimistic gesture towards ventilation. Or perhaps the smoke is just encouraged to find its own way out through the thatch. or the gaps in the wattle and daub walls. The result is a perpetual haze. Your eyes begin to sting, just a little at first, then a little more. You might find yourself blinking rapidly, a tear tracing a surprisingly clean path down a soot-smudged cheek. The air is thick with it, an acrid perfume that clings to your hair, your clothes, the very fabric of your being. It's not the clean, fragrant smoke of a well-managed barbecue. This is more persistent, ancient. It has a character, a weight. You look up, and the rafters, if you can even make them out, are coated in a thick, tarry layer of soot, glistening faintly in the firelight. Everything in the room wears this smoky patina. It's a preservative of sorts, though perhaps not one your lungs would thank you for. Mainstream historical fact, for you these open hearths, with smoke filling the living space, were the norm in many European peasant dwellings for centuries, long after grander houses adopted chimneys. The Bayeux Tapestry, for instance, depicts a building with smoke emerging from the roof, not a chimney stack. This constant smoky ambiance leads to some interesting debates. Historians still argue whether the slow, unintentional smoking of foodstuffs hung from the rafters to keep them away from pests was a primary method of preservation, or just a really, really effective way to make everything taste like a bonfire. You can imagine a side of bacon up there, slowly curing in the daily fug, probably delicious, in a robust sort of way. Now, this fire, this vital, smoky, temperamental heart, doesn't just manage itself. Oh no, it requires constant, unceasing attention. Tending the hearth is a job, a critical, never-ending task. Fuel, for starters. You'd need a steady supply of wood if you're in a forested area. And not just any wood, seasoned. Dry wood burns best. But you'd likely be making do with whatever you could scavenge, gather, or chop. In other regions, it might be peat, cut from the bog, or even dried animal dung, each with its own unique aromatic profile. You can just picture someone, perhaps a child or an older member of the household, whose daily chore it is to ensure the fuel supply doesn't dwindle. Then there's the actual fire management. You can't just toss logs on and hope for the best. It's a delicate balance, keeping it burning brightly enough for cooking and heat, but not so fiercely that it consumes fuel at an alarming rate, or, sets the highly flammable house on fire. You'd be constantly adjusting logs, poking embers, adding small twigs to encourage a reluctant flame, or carefully banking the coals at night. And here's a quirky little tidbit. The word curfew actually comes from the old French phrase couvre-feu, which literally means cover fire. It was an order to damp down or cover the hearth fires at a set time in the evening, largely as a fire prevention measure in closely packed medieval towns built mostly of wood. Imagine the anxiety if the fire did go out, especially in the dead of winter, relighting it with flint and tinder, or by borrowing an ember from a neighbor, was a non-trivial task. This fire is life, and letting it die is not really an option. It's not like today where if your pilot light goes out, you just call a guy. Here, you are the guy and the gal, and probably the slightly wheezing, smoke-eyed kid designated as assistant fire tender. It's a full-time commitment, this smoky embrace. You develop a sixth sense for it. The subtle shifts in its crackle, the way the smoke curls, the intensity of its glow. It's less a feature of the house and more like another occupant, a demanding, essential, and slightly hazardous roommate. The warmth we talked about, that fleeting comfort in the biting chill, doesn't just magically appear. Oh no. You're now intimately acquainted with the relentless, backbreaking pursuit of fuel, the very lifeline of your winter existence. It's not like you can just flick a switch or, heaven forbid, complain on social media that your central heating is on the fritz. Your smart home is just you, trying to be smart enough to not freeze. You feel the sharp bite of the late autumn air in your lungs, a constant reminder that time is running out. Every swing of the axe into a stubborn log sends a jolt up your arms. You're gathering wood, a task that has consumed weeks, if not months, of your life. You see the forest around you, not as a picturesque landscape, but as a dwindling resource. Each tree is measured in potential warmth, in hours of respite from the cold. You select trees carefully. Not just any old piece of timber will do. Green wood, freshly cut, is a smoky, frustrating mess that gives little heat. You need seasoned wood that's been allowed to dry, ideally for a good 6 months to a year. So, the wood you're cutting now, that's probably for next winter, or at least the tail end of this one, if you're desperate. Talk about planning ahead. Your current Netflix queue planning pales in comparison, doesn't it? The rhythmic thwack of the axe becomes your winter soundtrack, punctuated by the grunts of effort. You drag the heavy logs back to your dwelling, your muscles screaming in protest. It's a slow, arduous process, and it's not just you. Everyone who can walk and lift is involved. Children, their small hands chapped and red, gather smaller branches and kindling, their laughter surprisingly resilient amidst the toil. You remember seeing those idyllic paintings of peasants gathering wood, looking all rustic and charming. They conveniently leave out the splinters, the exhaustion, and the sheer mind-numbing repetition. Once gathered, storing this precious bounty is an art form in itself. You can't just dump it in a pile. Oh no, that would be far too easy. And nature, as we've established, isn't a fan of easy in this scenario. Your woodpile needs to be stacked strategically, allowing air to circulate for further drying, yet sheltered from the worst of the rain and snow. A lean-to against the side of your home, perhaps, or a dedicated woodshed if you're particularly well off or organized. You check it obsessively, like a dragon hoarding its gold, because in many ways, this is your gold. Each log represents a warm meal, a few more hours of staving off frostbite, a story told around a flickering hearth. Now, not everyone has access to sprawling forests. In other landscapes, you might be relying on different, equally labor-intensive fuels. Imagine yourself on a windswept moor. Here, your treasure is peat. You wield a special spade, a tusker, or a slian, nesh, to slice into the bog. You cut rectangular bricks of the dark, earthy substance. The scent of damp soil thicken the air. These heavy wet sods then need to be laid out to dry, a process that can take weeks, even months, depending on the fickle weather. You turn them regularly, like baking giant, muddy cookies in the sun and wind. Once dried, they are surprisingly lightweight and burn with a distinctive, smoky aroma, an aroma so characteristic that, for centuries, the smell of peat smoke was a clear indicator you were in certain parts of Scotland or Ireland. It's a smell that clings to clothes, to hair, to the very stones of the houses. It's probably not winning any perfume awards, unless the award is for most likely to evoke a damp Tuesday in the 14th century. And then there's the humblest of fuels, yet perhaps the most universally available dried animal dung. Yes, you heard that right. Before you wrinkle your nose, remember that in many treeless regions, this was, and in some places still is, a primary source of heat. You collect it, often from domestic animals like cows or yaks. You might mix it with straw or other organic matter, then shape it into flat cakes or briquettes. These are then dried in the sun, stuck to walls or laid out on the ground, until they are hard and combustible. It's not glamorous. No, you probably wouldn't put chief dung collector and patty maker on your medieval LinkedIn profile. But it's vital. The surprising thing is, dried dung burns remarkably well, often with less smoke than poorly seasoned wood. It's a testament to human ingenuity. Finding warmth even in waste kind of makes you rethink your recycling efforts, doesn't it? Though, please don't start eyeing Fido's contributions with newfound interest. Managing this hard-won fuel is a daily exercise in discipline and foresight. You don't just throw logs on the fire with abandon, creating a roaring blaze for ambiance. Each piece is accounted for. You learn to read your fire. To understand how much fuel gives the optimal heat for the longest time, cooking fires are often kept separate or managed differently from fires solely for warmth to maximize efficiency. You might have a central hearth, that's the heart of the home, but its hunger is insatiable. There's a constant calculation happening in your mind. How much fuel did we use yesterday? How much do we have left? Will it last until the first thaw? This isn't just about comfort. It's about survival. Running out of fuel midwinter is a death sentence. Plain and simple. It's why fuel was so precious, sometimes leading to disputes, or even theft if a neighbor grew desperate. A mainstream historical fact for you: the concept of forest rights, or commons rights, allowing local people to gather fallen wood, known as estovers, or graze animals, was incredibly important in medieval Europe and beyond. Access to these resources could mean the difference between a tolerable winter and utter destitution. It was serious business. You didn't just wander into the Lord's woods and start chopping like you owned the place, unless you enjoyed the prospect of some rather unpleasant legal ramifications. The labor is unceasing. Even when the snow lies deep, you might need to venture out to your woodpile, brushing off the snow, carefully selecting the driest pieces, or you might be digging into your peat stack, the cold seeping into your bones. It's a constant, gnawing anxiety. This fuel situation. You learn to appreciate the subtle differences in how various woods burn. Oak for a long, slow heat, pine for a quick, bright flame but faster consumption. Ash wood, as the old saying goes, is green or old. Fit for a queen with a crown of gold, meaning it burns well even when freshly cut. A truly valuable characteristic. That's like finding a phone charger that actually works on the first try. Pure magic. Here's a quirky little tidbit for you in some cultures. The task of gathering specific types of tinder, like certain tree fungi, think amadou, from the Fomes fomentarius fungus, also known as the tinder fungus, was a specialized skill. This wasn't fuel itself, but essential for starting the fire that would consume your precious wood or peat. Without good tinder and a reliable way to make a spark, perhaps with flint and steel, remember those, all that hoarded fuel is just a cold, dead pile. You could have a mountain of wood, but if you can't light it, you're just the proud owner of a very large, very cold sculpture and the scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether the perceived wood shortages in certain periods were actual widespread deforestation affecting entire regions, or more localized issues of access and distribution, often exacerbated by social hierarchies, where the wealthy controlled vast woodlands, while commoners struggled for every twig they could legally, or sometimes not so legally, obtain. It paints a picture where your ability to stay warm was very much tied to your place in society, and whether you had the rights or the audacity to gather what you needed. You develop an almost spiritual connection to your fire. It's more than just burning material. It's life. It's the focal point of your cramped winter world. You watch the flames dance, listen to the crackle and pop, and feel a profound, almost primal gratitude for its presence. The smoke, sometimes acrid and eye-watering if the wood is damp, or the chimney if you even have one. Remember those smoke-filled rooms we talked about from earlier? Isn't drawing well, is just part of the experience. You learn to live with the constant smell of wood smoke in your clothes, your hair, permeating everything. It's the perfume of survival. So, as you huddle closer to that precious flickering flame. You understand. You understand why every single piece of fuel was gathered with such effort, stored with such care, and burned with such mindfulness. It's not just about keeping the chill at bay. It's about fueling the lifeline, quite literally, through the darkest, coldest months. It's the slow, steady heartbeat of your winter world, a rhythm set by the gathering, the storing, and the careful, almost reverent, consumption of warmth. And you thought choosing what to watch next on your streaming service was a high-stakes decision. Try choosing between a slightly warmer room tonight or enough fuel to cook tomorrow's meager meal. That's the kind of choice that really heats things up. The sun, that glorious free source of illumination we were just talking about, has long since abandoned you. Remember that chill we discussed? The one that seeps in as evening draws on well. Now it has a companion, the deep, profound darkness of a pre-industrial night. Your world, once stretching as far as the eye could see, now shrinks to a tiny flickering bubble. And what creates this bubble? Let's not get too excited. Forget flipping a switch for instant, room-filling brilliance. Oh no, your options are quaint, and mostly involve animal fat. Your most basic, everyday companion against the gloom is likely the humble rushlight. You might have even helped make them. Imagine taking a common rush, carefully peeling it to leave just a single slender strip of green rind to support the spongy pith inside. Then, you dip this fragile wand into whatever leftover cooking grease or animal fat, mutton, beef, maybe even bacon if you were feeling fancy, that the household had managed to save. It's a painstaking process, this creation of temporary light. Families would spend hours during lighter months meticulously peeling rushes, leaving just a thin strip of green to support the pith, before carefully dipping them in saved kitchen fats. This, by the way, is a quirky little tidbit of everyday life, the sheer domestic labor involved in producing even the most rudimentary form of lighting. These weren't exactly beacons of hope, more like faint, smoky whispers against the overwhelming dark. You place your freshly made, or perhaps days-old rushlight into a simple holder, maybe a cleft stick or a basic iron grip. It sputters to life, casting a feeble yellow glow. The light is, well, it's there, barely. It's a greasy, smoky affair, this rushlight. It gives off a rather distinct aroma, a sort of savory, slightly acrid perfume that clings to your clothes and hair. Don't expect to read a dense philosophical treatise by its glow. You'd be lucky to see your own hand, clearly a few feet away. It's not exactly mood lighting, unless the mood is, I might trip over the cat and start a small inferno. And they don't last long. Maybe 20 minutes, half an hour if you're lucky, before sputtering out, demanding another be lit, assuming you have another. The constant need to replenish them is a task in itself. Now, if you're a bit more prosperous, or it's a special occasion, you might have candles, but again, let's manage expectations. We're most likely talking about tallow candles. These are made from rendered animal fat. Suet? Mostly. Think of them as the rushlights, slightly more robust, but equally fragrant. Cousin? They burn longer, yes, and give a bit more light. But oh, the smell. A room lit by several tallow candles has a distinctive, heavy greasy odor, and they gutter and smoke something fierce if there's any draft. Which, in your average medieval dwelling, remember those breezy constructions, is pretty much guaranteed. The wicks need constant trimming with a little tool called a snuffer, not just to put them out, but to keep them burning as cleanly as possible. Neglect it, and you'll have more smoke than light, and a real sooty mess. Then there's the beeswax candle. Ah, the height of luxury. These are the clean-burning, sweet-smelling celebrities of the candle world. They cast a steadier, brighter, more pleasant light. But goodness, are they expensive. Beeswax was a precious commodity, so unless you're nobility, or perhaps in a church or monastery where they were more common. And here's a mainstream historical fact. For you, beeswax candles were indeed the preferred, and often mandated, choice for ecclesiastical settings due to their cleaner burn and more pleasant aroma. Seen as more fitting for sacred spaces, you're probably not burning these casually. Beeswax candles were the iPhones of their day, sleek and desirable, and costing an arm and a leg, or perhaps a few chickens. For most, they're an aspiration, not a daily reality. And torches. You might imagine brave knights striding through castle halls with flaming torches held high. And yes, they existed. Usually a length of wood wrapped with resin-soaked rags or tow. But for your average indoor domestic setting, highly impractical. They produce a lot of light, yes, but also a lot of smoke, sparks, and an undeniable fire hazard in a predominantly wooden, thatch-roofed house. Torches are more for outdoor processions, or perhaps the very largest, stone-built, well-ventilated great halls of the extremely wealthy. For your little cottage, sticking a flaming torch in the corner is just asking for trouble. So, you're huddled there. Maybe you have one rushlight flickering valiantly, or perhaps two if it's a particularly daring evening. This tiny pinprick of light creates a small wavering circle around you. Inside this circle is life, such as it is after dark. You can see the rough texture of the wall beside you, the glint in someone's eye across the small table. Maybe the outline of the stew pot by the hearth we talked about earlier. But beyond that small KPE, precious pool of light. That's where the real story of the medieval night begins. It's not just dark, like when you turn off your modern bedroom light. This is an immense, encroaching, tangible darkness. It presses in from every unlit corner, from the unglazed windows covered only by wooden shutters, from the doorway where the ill-fitting door lets drafts and darkness seep in. The shadows thrown by your meager flame are huge, distorted, dancing things. They writhe on the walls, making familiar objects seem strange and menacing. Is that a pile of cloaks? Or something else lurking just beyond the light's reach? The long winter nights, especially, must have felt almost endless. With the sun setting so early, you're looking at 17 hours of darkness. What do you do? Work that requires fine detail is impossible. Reading, for the literate few, would be a strain, even with a precious candle. Trying to read by this light, you'd have a brighter future staring directly into a particularly reflective turnip. So, you talk, you mend simple things by feel, you huddle for warmth, or you simply go to bed very, very early. The darkness dictates the rhythm of life in a way we can barely comprehend with our 24/7 artificially lit world. This overwhelming darkness wasn't just an inconvenience. It shaped the medieval psyche. It was a world populated by things unseen. Historians still argue whether the widespread belief in nighttime spirits and demons was a genuine folkloric tradition or simply a very effective way to keep children from wandering off into the pitch black, and frankly, rather hazardous night. Whatever the case, the night was a different realm, one where the familiar rules of the day seemed to bend and warp under the weight of so much shadow. The small and flickering flame wasn't just fighting the lack of light. It was a tiny outpost of human presence against a vast, indifferent, and perhaps even hostile universe of black. You're not just in the dark, you're surrounded by it. A tiny island of sputtering light in an ocean of a long, long night. Right then, as the last embers of that smoky fire we huddled around earlier begin to fade, casting long dancing shadows that make the corners of your modest dwelling seem even deeper and more mysterious. Your thoughts turn to sleep, or at least, the medieval equivalent of it. You're not exactly heading for a four-poster with a fluffy duvet and a thread count higher than your annual income. No, your nightly repose is a much earthier affair. You approach what serves as your bed. It's likely a simple pallet, perhaps a slightly raised wooden frame if you're doing all right for yourself. But for many, it's just a designated patch of the floor. And upon this hallowed ground lies your mattress. Forget memory foam. Forget pocket springs. You're looking at a sack, probably made of coarse linen or burlap, stuffed with straw. Yes, straw. The very same stuff you might see in a barn. You give it a tentative prod. It rustles. A dry, papery sound that speaks of fields. And, well, probably a few mice who've also decided this is prime real estate. You can almost hear them now. Tiny squeaks and scrabblings from within its depths. Sweet dreams. This isn't just any straw, mind you. It's likely been there for a while, compacting down, absorbing the ambient smells of the hut, that lingering wood smoke, damp earth, unwashed bodies, maybe even a hint of last week's stew. Changing the straw is a bit of an event, not a daily chore, so it has plenty of time to develop its own unique character. You might find it lumpy in places, flatter in others, and there's always that one rogue stalk that seems determined to introduce itself to your ribcage with surprising persistence throughout the night. It's less a mattress and more a topographical map of past discomforts. You sink down, and it conforms to your shape with a sigh of resignation, as if to say, "Oh, it's you again. Now, for your coverings." You reach for a wool blanket, or, more accurately, several wool blankets, because layering is not just a fashion statement here. It's a survival strategy. These aren't the soft merino wool throws you might find in a cozy boutique. This is utilitarian wool, thick, heavy, and possessing a certain robust texture. It's probably a bit scratchy, retaining the natural lanolin from the sheep, which, on the upside, makes it somewhat water resistant, handy in a drafty hut where the roof might not be entirely convinced of its primary function. The colors are muted, earthy browns, grays, or the natural creamy white of undyed fleece. You pull one up, then another. The weight is comforting, a heavy pressure that grounds you, even as the itchiness begins its subtle campaign. If your family is a little more prosperous, or perhaps just very good at trapping, you might have the added luxury of furs, not ermine and sable, unless you've seriously misunderstood your station in life, but more practical pelts, rabbit fur, soft and surprisingly warm, though not the most durable, deer hide, tougher and larger, maybe even a wolf or bear skin if you're particularly fortunate or brave. These aren't neatly tanned and lined. They're likely a bit stiff, retaining the faint, wild scent of the animal. You drape a fox fur, perhaps, over your woolen layers. It's an extra barrier against the biting chill that, remember, seeps in through every chink in those wattle and daub walls we talked about. This fur is more than just warmth. It's a small symbol of status, a little bit of rugged comfort in a world that offers few such indulgences. You'd be surprised how much a slightly better smelling dead animal can improve your night. The principle is simple: trap your own body heat. You're probably still wearing most of the clothes you had on during the day. That simple tunic, perhaps your braise or undertunic. These form the base layer, then the wool blankets, then the furs if you have them. Each layer creates little pockets of air, insulators against the cold that seems to press in from all sides, especially as the night deepens and the fire dies completely. You tuck the edges in, trying to create a seal against the drafts that snake across the floor like icy little serpents. It's a very personal, very necessary art form, this nightly construction of your cocoon, and you're almost certainly not sleeping alone. Huddling together is standard practice. Your whole family might share one large sleeping area, bundled together like a pile of sleepy puppies. It's practical. More bodies mean more warmth. Privacy, as you understand it, is a concept for the incredibly wealthy or the deeply eccentric. Your nose to nape with your siblings, your parents, maybe even a grandparent or two. You learn to sleep through a symphony of snores, coughs, and the occasional nocturnal mumbling. It's a bit like a human jigsaw puzzle, everyone fitting together as best they can. Mainstream historical fact for you: elaborate curtained beds were indeed a luxury largely confined to the nobility and wealthy merchants. For most of the population, sleeping arrangements were far more communal and basic, often involving the whole family sharing a single straw pallet or bed. You get used to the smells, the sounds, the sheer proximity. There's a certain intimacy to it, a shared vulnerability against the darkness and the cold. But also, let's be honest, it could lead to some pretty awkward morning breath situations. Good morrow, brother. Your exhalations smell faintly of fermented turnip again. Charming. A quirky little tidbit for you: many households kept what was known as a bedstaff. This was a sturdy wooden pole, and its uses were twofold. Firstly, it was used to beat the straw mattress, to fluff it up, dislodge dust, and encourage any resident vermin to perhaps seek alternative accommodation. Secondly, it was used to smooth out the bedclothes before getting in. So, you might give your lumpy straw a good thwacking before you settle down, hoping to evict at least the more audacious critters. Think of it as percussive pest control. As you lie there, cocooned in your layers, surrounded by the gentle or not so gentle sounds of your sleeping family. The world outside the thin walls of your hut continues. The wind whispers, or perhaps howls, depending on the season. An owl might hoot in the distance, a fox might bark. The straw rustles with every small movement. The wool feels rough against your skin. You can smell the lingering smoke, the damp earth, the slightly musty scent of the straw, and the undeniable aroma of unwashed humanity. It's a far cry from your lavender-scented pillow and Egyptian cotton sheets, isn't it? If you complained about a hotel mattress being a bit firm, this experience might offer perspective. Historians still argue whether the prevalence of these communal sleeping arrangements, often in poorly ventilated spaces, significantly contributed to the spread of diseases, or if the undeniable benefit of shared warmth in an era without central heating simply outweighed those risks in the grim calculus of survival. It's one of those debates where the evidence is sparse, and the interpretations can vary wildly. For you, in this moment, it's not an academic question. It's just life, or rather, night. You close your eyes, feeling the slow, rhythmic breathing of the person next to you. A small warm presence in the vast, cold darkness. The chill still finds its way in. A cold finger tracing the edge of your blanket. A reminder of the world beyond your fragile shelter. You pull your coverings a little tighter, burrow a little deeper, and try to find that elusive path to sleep. So, you've managed to make it inside, perhaps shedding some of that outer layer caked with mud or snow, like we talked about with those heavy outer cloaks. But don't get too comfortable just yet. Stepping into this dwelling, whether it's a somewhat grander stone manor or a more humble timber-framed house, doesn't mean you're suddenly basking in a warm, centrally heated embrace. Oh no, that's a luxury many, many centuries away. You're still going to be, well, a bit chilly. Quite chilly, actually. You feel that draft, don't you? It seems to find every tiny gap in the wattle and daub, every ill-fitting window shutter we peeked through earlier. The fire, which we know is roaring away in the hearth, does its best, casting a lovely flickering glow and radiating some warmth if you're practically sitting in its lap. but venture more than a few feet away, and that comforting heat diminishes rather dramatically. It's a localized warmth, a tiny island of comfort in a sea of cool air. So, how do you cope? You don't just strip down to your, well, whatever you imagine people stripped down to. You remain bundled. Let's talk about what you're wearing. Indoors. It's all about the layers. Darling, think of yourself as a sort of human onion, or perhaps a very well-dressed cabbage. It's not just for dramatic effect when you see historical dramas with people swaddled in fabric, even when they're just, moping around their castle. The base layer, closest to your skin, is almost invariably linen. Remember that scratchy feeling we imagined? Well, good quality linen, after many washes, could actually become surprisingly soft. This linen layer, a chemise or a shift, perhaps a pair of braids, which are basically loose-fitting under trousers, serves a crucial purpose. It absorbs sweat and body oils, protecting the more expensive woolen outer layers from getting soiled too quickly. Washing wool frequently was a much more arduous task than laundering linen, and it wore the fabric out. So, your linen undershirt is your first line of defense against both the cold and the hassle of medieval laundry day, which, trust me, you did not want to experience. No delicate cycle back then. Over that linen, you'd add wool, and then probably more wool. Wool was the star player in the warmth game. It has fantastic insulating properties, trapping air between its fibers, and it even retains some of its warming ability when damp, which is a pretty neat trick. You might have a woolen tunic or a kirtle, which is a sort of fitted gown. For men, perhaps woolen hose, pulled up high and tied to their braids or a belt. For women, long woolen dresses, possibly several. The quality and fineness of the wool would vary wildly depending on your social standing and wealth. Of course, the wealthy might have access to finer, softer wools, perhaps even dyed in rich colors, a subtle flex even indoors. The less well-off would be working with coarser, homespun wool, sturdy and warm, but maybe not winning any fashion awards. It's a mainstream historical fact that Wendy, sumptuary laws often dictated not only the types of fabrics, but also the colors individuals of different social classes could wear, ensuring that even your indoor lounging attire subtly broadcast your place in the world. You wouldn't want the peasants getting too many fancy ideas about purple? Now would you? So you're layered linen against the skin. Then 1, 2, maybe even 3 layers of wool on top. Think of a long-sleeved woolen gown, and perhaps over that, another sleeveless gown or a tabard for extra core warmth, maybe even a woolen cap or a coif indoors, especially for older folks, or if you're feeling particularly shivery. Your ears get cold too, It's not just about looking pious with a head covering. It's genuinely practical. You might even have indoor shoes or soft slippers, perhaps made of leather or thick fabric, to keep your feet from freezing on those cold stone or packed earth floors we tiptoed across. Remember the drafts? They love ankles. Now, why all this fuss if there's a fire? Because, as we've established, medieval fireplaces, while providing essential heat and a cooking source, were not terribly efficient at heating a whole room, let alone a whole house. They were often large and open, meaning a lot of the heat went straight up the chimney, assuming you even had a proper chimney. Many earlier or simpler dwellings just had a smoke hole in the roof. Romantic, in a very smoky, eye-watering sort of way, so the ambient temperature in most rooms, especially larger ones, or those further from the main hearth, would remain stubbornly low, particularly during the colder months. You're essentially creating your own personal microclimate with your clothing. That fire is more like a focal point, a place to gather for a brief respite from the pervasive chill, rather than a central heating system. You'd huddle near it, then retreat back into the cooler parts of the room, still wrapped up. It's interesting. Historians still argue whether the perceived discomfort from cold by medieval people was physiologically different from our own, or if they were simply more stoic and accustomed to conditions we'd find unbearable. Were they just tougher? Or did they genuinely feel the cold less acutely after a lifetime of exposure? It's a fascinating thought. You, with your modern sensibilities, would likely find it persistently, naggingly cold. Not necessarily, I'm going to freeze to death cold if you're indoors and dressed for it, but a constant, low-level chill that seeps into your bones, making you crave that next moment by the fire. And here's a quirky little tidbit for you. Some wealthier individuals might have had bed curtains not just for privacy, but also to create a warmer sleeping environment. A bed enclosed with heavy fabric drapes would trap body heat, essentially making a little warm tent within a cold room. So even your sleeping arrangements were an admission that the ambient indoor temperature wasn't cutting it. Imagine waking up and having to brave the chill outside your bed tent. Suddenly, hitting snooze on your alarm doesn't seem so bad, does it? The thought of getting dressed in multiple layers in a frigid room, it's enough to make you want to stay under the covers, or in this case, within the bed curtains, until April. So you sit there, perhaps by a flickering tallow candle, feeling the slightly rough texture of your woolen outer layer, the softer linen beneath. You can smell the wood smoke from the fire, a scent that clings to everything, including your clothes. You might adjust your sleeves, pulling them further over your hands. You're not shivering violently, not if you're dressed right, but there's a constant awareness of the cold beyond your woolen shell. It's a different kind of indoor experience, one where your clothing is less about fashion statement, though that played a part, as we mentioned with the sumptuary laws, and more about a fundamental barrier against an ever-present, unwelcome guest, the chill. You'd probably find yourself thinking, you know, for a roaring fire, it's still remarkably parky in here. And you'd be absolutely right. Your medieval host, if they could understand the word parky, would probably just nod sagely and pull their own woolen layers a bit tighter. The weight of the clothes alone would be noticeable, not like a heavy winter coat you wear outside and then shed, but a persistent, day-long encasement. Moving around might feel a little more cumbersome. You're not exactly nimble in 3 layers of wool, but it's the price of relative comfort. And relative is the operative word here. It's a constant battle, this indoor chill, and your wardrobe is your primary arsenal. Every fold of fabric, every tie and belt is part of your personal defense system. It makes you appreciate that modern thermostat just a little bit more, doesn't it? That little dial on the wall is a kind of magic they couldn't have even dreamed of. And as the daylight, remember how little of it there was, finally gives up the ghost for the day. Your thoughts and your stomach inevitably turn to what's cooking, or more accurately, what's still available to cook. Winter in our little medieval village isn't exactly a gourmet tour. Is it more like a survivalist's pantry challenge every single day? You shuffle towards the area where food is kept, perhaps a small, cold pantry space, or even just a corner of your one-room home, sectioned off. The air here is different. It's got that distinct, slightly damp, earthy smell of stored roots, mingled with the sharp tang of salt and smoke from preserved meats. Forget your fancy spice racks. This is the aroma of getting through the next few months. First, let's talk about the stars of the show, or perhaps the only actors available for this very long, very repetitive play, the stored provisions. Remember all that hard work in the autumn, the harvesting, the drying, the salting. This is where it pays off, or at least where you hope it does. You see strings of dried apples, looking a bit like leathery, shrunken versions of their summer selves. Not exactly your kids' fruit roll-ups, but a welcome touch of sweetness, however faint. Dried peas and beans, hard as pebbles, wait patiently in sacks, promising substance, if not excitement. You might also find dried mushrooms, carefully gathered from the woods in better days. Their earthy scent, now concentrated and intense, a promise of a deeper flavor for the pot. And then there's the meat. Oh, the meat. If you were fortunate enough to have a pig slaughtered in the autumn, a good portion of it is now intense. You see sides of bacon and ham, cured with so much salt, they're practically immortal. Honestly, if you ate this stuff regularly today, your doctor would have a field day. Your blood pressure would be through the thatched roof. This wasn't about delicate charcuterie. This was about stopping bacteria dead in its tracks. Fish, if you're near a river or coast and had a good season, is similarly preserved, split, salted, and dried until it's stiff as a board. Rehydrating it is a whole process, a lengthy soak, sometimes for a day or more, changing the water frequently to try and coax some semblance of its former self back, and to wash away enough salt so it doesn't taste like licking the seafloor. It's a testament to human ingenuity. Really, figuring out how to make food last without a trusty humming refrigerator. In fact, the reliance on salt for preservation is a huge, mainstream historical fact. It was a precious commodity, sometimes called white gold, almost like currency, because it directly translated to survival through the lean months. Its control could make or break local economies, below these hanging treasures, or perhaps in a shallow pit dug into the earth floor, or even a more dedicated root cellar if you're a bit better off, are the root vegetables. These are your winter workhorses: turnips, parsnips. Carrots, though, probably paler, whiter, or more purple versions than our vibrant orange supermarket staples. Onions and leeks. They're nestled in sand or dry earth, a method that helps keep them from rotting too quickly, drawing out a bit of moisture and keeping them cool and dark. You reach for a few turnips, their skins cool and slightly rough in your hand. They don't look like much, perhaps a bit gnarled and earthy, but they're calories, they're filling, and they're familiar. The slight sweetness of a parsnip, if you can find one that hasn't gone woody, is a particular treat. So, what culinary masterpieces are you whipping up with this bounty? Well, masterpiece might be an overstatement. Think simple, think warm, think repetitive. The undisputed champion of the winter menu is pottage. Again, yes, pottage. It's that hearty, thick stew. A simmering cauldron of, well, whatever you've got. Today, it's those turnips, maybe some dried peas that have been soaking, a precious few scraps of that salty bacon, carefully minced to spread the flavor, and if you're lucky, some hoarded dried herbs like thyme or sage for a hint of something other than root vegetable with a side of salt. It bubbles away over the hearth, the pot hanging from a hook over the flames, filling the small space with a steamy, hopefully savory aroma. Some days it's thicker, almost a porridge. Some days thinner, more of a broth. Some days it might have a bit more barley or oats to bulk it out, making it stick to your ribs. It's the original one-pot meal, endlessly adaptable, endlessly the same. Pottage again, you might think, as you ladle it into your wooden bowl. It's only Tuesday. Feels like pottage day number 5 this week. Bread, of course, is still a staple, but it's likely a heavier, darker affair than any summer bread made with finer flours, made with rye or barley, perhaps mixed with pea flour or even ground acorns in truly lean times if grain is scarce. It's dense, something to really chew on, perfect for soaking up every last drop of that pottage, ensuring no precious calories are wasted. Freshness is a luxury. You're probably eating bread that's a few days old, a bit on the stale side, but it's fuel. You might toast it by the fire to soften it up a little, the smoky char adding another layer to its simple taste. The warmth of the meal is almost as important as the calories. You huddle closer to the fire, spooning the hot pottage, feeling it spread through you. A temporary reprieve from the gnawing chill that seems to seep in from every crack in the wattle and daub walls. Remember those? It's not exciting. This diet, there's a distinct lack of fresh greens, of vibrant flavors, of the variety we take utterly for granted. Historians still argue whether sabur, the average peasant, experienced true famine conditions regularly in winter, meaning outright starvation, or if persistent seasonal hunger or chronic malnutrition is a more accurate term for most years, with actual famine being a more acute, crisis-driven event. It was certainly a far cry from our modern obsession with 5 a day and a balanced nutrient profile. And what are you washing this down with water? Of course, is an option, if your well hasn't frozen too badly or become too murky from winter rains. But the preferred beverage, even for children in many cases, is ale, not the strong craft IPAs you might be thinking of. With their complex hop profiles, this is small beer, a weak, low-alcohol brew, often made daily or every few days in the household. It's considered safer than water, which could be contaminated with all sorts of things, as the brewing process, the boiling of the wort, killed off some of the nasty little microscopic things. It probably tastes, well, it's wet. It's slightly malty, perhaps a little sour if the brewing wasn't perfect. It might as well be lightly flavored water for some of the weaker brews. But hey, it's something different, and it provides some minimal calories for a bit of comfort, especially if you're feeling a bit under the weather or just particularly chilled to the bone. There might be a posset. This is a warm, milky drink, often curdled with ale or wine if you're very fancy, and have wine, which is unlikely for most, and perhaps sweetened with a tiny bit of precious honey if it can be spared, or even just thickened with breadcrumbs. Sometimes a few spices, like a pinch of ginger or a scraping of nutmeg. If you were incredibly fortunate or had traded well with a passing peddler, might make an appearance, transforming it into a truly luxurious treat. Imagine sipping that, warm and sweet, a small comfort in the vast cold darkness, the steam warming your face. A particularly quirky tidbit about medieval meals, especially something like pottage, is the concept of twice-laid food, or sometimes called funeral baked meats, in a slightly different, though related on context of leftovers. This isn't about setting the table twice. It refers to leftovers, particularly pottage, being reheated the next day, often with new ingredients added in. It's economical, practical, and ensures nothing goes to waste. So that pottage you had on Tuesday, it might reappear on Wednesday, perhaps bulked out with a few more chopped carrots or a handful of barley. Its flavor subtly changed, but still fundamentally the same. Waste not, one want not. Especially when want is a very real possibility peering through the frosty window or rattling the door latch. So, you sit there, the meager light of the fire flickering, the wind howling outside like we talked about earlier, and you eat your simple, salty turnipy meal from your rough wooden bowl with your wooden spoon. It's not Instagram worthy. There are no celebrity chefs involved, but it's sustenance. It's what stands between you and the brutal reality of a winter without supermarkets, without refrigerated transport, without Amazon Prime delivering your groceries in an hour. It's the taste of survival, one warm, monotonous, but life-giving spoonful at a time. And as that precious fire, the one we imagined flickering so hopefully in the hearth, begins to wane, as its warmth retreats and the embers shrink to little glowing eyes in the deepening darkness, you become aware of other presences, another source of heat. however faint, permeates this single, shared space. It's not the fire, and it's certainly not central heating, unless you count the very, very original version. You see, you're not entirely alone with the human occupants. You shift slightly on your rough bedding, perhaps a straw pallet that's seen better days, and your ears, now attuned to the quiet. Pick up new sounds, a soft, contented clucking from a shadowy corner, a gentle, rhythmic snuffling from another, maybe even a low, sleepy grunt. Yes, tonight, and most nights, you're sharing your living quarters, your bedroom, your everything room, with the livestock. It's the original open-plan living, just with more feathers and snout. Imagine the scene, the small one-room dwelling, already snug by our modern standards, now also serves as a barn. Chickens, those ever-present contributors to the household economy, are often the most common roommates. They might be roosting on a makeshift perch tucked into a corner, or perhaps even in a specially constructed alcove if the family is feeling particularly ambitious with their interior design. You might see a hen or two nestled in a basket. Hopefully, not your basket, keeping her eggs warm. And by extension, you, their gentle, almost purring clucks, are a constant, soft soundtrack to the night. Then, there are the pigs. Oh, the pigs. Not the giant hogs you might picture on a modern farm, but perhaps a sow and her litter, or a couple of younger ones being fattened up. They're usually given a slightly more robust section of the floor, often near the door, but still within the precious warmth envelope of the house. You can hear their soft snorts, the rustle as they shift in their straw, a surprisingly delicate sound for such an animal. Their body heat is significant, a real boon on a frigid night when the wind, like we discussed, is finding every single crack in those wattle and daub walls. It's a known fact that throughout many pre-industrial societies, especially in colder climes, bringing animals indoors was a vital survival strategy, not just for the animals, but for the humans who depended on their warmth. These creatures weren't just food. They were walking, oinking radiators. Sometimes, if the family is fortunate enough, or if the weather is particularly brutal, you might even find a calf or a few lambs brought inside. These are valuable assets, far too precious to risk losing to the cold or to predators. So, they join the merry mixed species slumber party. You can almost feel the collective sigh of warmth they generate, a sort of biofurnace effect, mingling with the last vestiges of the fire's heat. It's an undeniable comfort. This shared warmth, a primal sense of security in numbers, even if some of those numbers have trotters. Now, let's address the elephant in the room, or rather, the pig in the parlor. With all these lovely warm bodies comes an aroma, a certain je ne sais quoi. That wasn't bottled by Parisian perfumers. You breathe in deeply, and the air is thick, earthy, a complex bouquet of damp straw, animal musk, and the unmistakable, that ever-present scent of manure. It's not aggressively foul, not after you've been immersed in it for a while. Your nose, bless its adaptability, does its best to file it under ambient, but it's there, a constant reminder of your roommate's digestive processes. Any romantic notions you had about rustic living are probably getting a serious reality check right about now. Forget scented candles. The only air freshener here is an occasionally open door. And even then, it's a trade-off with the cold. You might even joke that it's just eau de farmhouse. Very exclusive, very organic. And with the smell, naturally, come the hygiene considerations. Or perhaps the charming lack thereof. The floor, which we've already established isn't exactly polished oak, is now also a communal latrine for your animal friends. While there might be some attempt to designate a potty corner for the pig, chickens are rather more free-spirited in their contributions. You learn very quickly to watch where you step, even in the dark. It's a skill honed by necessity. The straw bedding helps, a bit, absorbing some of the mess, but it needs frequent changing, a laborious task that adds to the daily grind. It's interesting. Some household accounts from the period even mention designated dung channels or specific brooms used only for animal messes inside the home. A quirky tidbit that shows they were aware, if not always able to fully mitigate. The mess, pests, too, are an inevitable part of this cozy cohabitation. Fleas, lice, flies in warmer weather. They don't much discriminate between human and animal hosts. It's a shared ecosystem, and you're all in it together. The idea of a sterile environment is centuries away. Here, life is a bit more lived in. The constant presence of animals, while providing warmth and a degree of security for these valuable assets, also meant a higher risk of zoonotic diseases, something modern science understands well, but which for them was just another unexplained peril of life. Historians still argue whether the undeniable benefit of the animals' warmth and their protection from theft or predators truly offset the very real, if poorly understood, health risks associated with such close quarters, or if it was simply a calculation of immediate survival against less immediate threats. You might find yourself chuckling softly in the dark, thinking about how some people today fret if their pampered pooch dares to jump on the sofa. Here, the sofa is the pig, or at least shares its living room. It's a far cry from a HEPA filter and antimicrobial hand soap. Yet, there's a strange sort of acceptance, a pragmatism born of necessity. This isn't a lifestyle choice. It's a survival strategy. The warmth is real. The security for the animals is real. And the family's livelihood often depends on these very creatures. So, you snuggle deeper into your own, less than pristine bedding, trying to ignore the errant feather tickling your nose, or the sudden, surprisingly loud snore from the piglet, who's decided your discarded sock makes an excellent pillow. It's just another night in your shared, multi-species accommodation, a testament to the lengths people would go to endure, to keep warm, and to protect what little they had in a world that offered few other comforts. You might even find a strange, sleepy gratitude for the snuffling, grunting, clucking warmth beside you. After all, they're pulling their weight in their own special, smelly way. And as your eyes adjust to that dim, fire-lit interior we talked about, the first thing that truly hits you, long before you can make out many details, is the smell. Oh, the smell. It's a complex beast, this medieval winter air. And the dominant note, the one that announces itself with all the subtlety of a charging night, is smoke. Not the gentle, fragrant smoke of a distant autumn bonfire. No, this is thick, acrid, and utterly pervasive. It's the breath of the house, really, exhaled constantly from that central hearth we saw, the one doing double duty for warmth and whatever cooking is happening. You feel it sting your eyes, a familiar sensation if you've spent any time here. It catches in the back of your throat, a dry, raspy coating. Everything you touch, everything you own, if you were living here, would be impregnated with it. Your clothes, your hair, the very tapestries on the wall, if you're fancy enough for tapestries, that is, all carry this signature scent. It's like the original smoked everything trend, though perhaps a bit too literally applied to your lungs. This isn't just a byproduct of heating. It was also, believe it or not, thought to have some purifying qualities. A mainstream historical fact is that smoke was often used in attempts to ward off disease or fumigate spaces. A sort of medieval Febreze. If Febreze also made you cough and your eyes water, you can almost taste it. A bitter tang that mingles with every breath you take. You might even find tiny flakes of soot gently drifting down from the blackened rafters, like a very depressing form of indoor snowfall, settling softly on every surface. Beneath that heavy blanket of smoke, Other scents jostle for attention, eager for their moment in your nostrils. Remember how we mentioned that in winter? You're not just sharing your cozy, and I use that term very loosely, abode with your human family. You've also got your furry, feathery, and occasionally quite pungent roommates, the animals, for their safety from the brutal cold and from opportunistic predators, and frankly, for their own body heat contributing to the general fug inside. Valuable livestock like chickens, perhaps a favored piglet, or even a young calf might be brought indoors, or at least into an attached byre that generously shares a good deal of its distinctive aroma, with the main living space. So, you get this rich, earthy smell of manure, not fresh, sun-baked farmyard manure, but the damp, concentrated scent of animals living in close confinement. There's the slightly oily, musky smell of wet wool if sheep were recently shorn or brought in damp from a winter sleet. The cloying sweetness of animal breath, warm and heavy in the chilled air, and the undeniable sharpness of urine seeping into the earthen floor, or the layers of rushes we talked about earlier, slowly composting in place. A quirky, lesser-known tidbit for you is that some households would keep weasels or ferrets, not just for enthusiastic pest control, but because their distinct, rather potent musk was, by some, considered less offensive than the pervasive smell of rats and mice and their droppings. It's a pick-your-poison kind of olfactory situation, really. So, you can go ahead and mentally add that layer of barnyard chic to the smoky-based note we've already established. And speaking of close confinement and shared air, let's not forget the human element in this fragrant tapestry. Hygiene in winter. Well, it's not exactly a trip to the local spa with cucumber water and fluffy robes. Full baths, remember, were quite an undertaking, especially when hauling and heating enough water felt like a monumental, energy-sapping task, all set against the backdrop of biting cold that just leached warmth from everything. So, you're inevitably enveloped by the unmistakable scent of unwashed humanity. It's a complex blend, this one stale sweat, the natural oils of the skin, and perhaps a lingering hint of what everyone had for dinner 3 days ago, clinging tenaciously to their unlaundered, heavy woolen clothes. Wool, as we know, is a fantastic insulator, great for warmth, but it also holds onto odors with a dedication that's almost admirable, locking them in like tiny, smelly secrets. And it's not as if you're changing into fresh, lavender-scented pajamas every night. Those layers of clothing often stay on, or are worn for extended periods, day in and day out, accumulating their own unique character. Historians still argue whether the general populace smelled bad to each other, or if this level of ambient human scent was just the accepted norm, the olfactory background radiation of daily life, so to speak, something you simply got used to. It's easy for us with our daily showers, myriad soaps, and powerful deodorants to recoil in imagined disgust, but for them, this was simply the smell of people, of winter, of shared survival, maybe a little gamey, perhaps a little sour, but ultimately familiar and unremarkable. Now, let's mentally layer in the pantry, or rather, the olfactory contributions of what's in the pantry, or what's hanging from the rafters, or carefully stored in wooden chests. Winter, as we've discussed, is the season of preserved foods, and each type of preservation method brings its own distinct signature to the air. You get the salty, sometimes slightly gamey aroma of dried and smoked meats. Yes, more smoke, just a different, meatier variety this time, mingling with the wood smoke. There's the sharp, tangy, almost vinegary smell of fermented vegetables, like sauerkraut or pickled items, which were absolutely crucial for providing vitamins and variety through the long, lean months. Picture the slightly dusty, sweetish scent of stored grains and flour, perhaps with a faint, earthy undercurrent of mustiness if damp has started to creep into the storage sacks or barrels. And fats, rendered animal fats stored in earthenware pots, might be giving off a slightly rancid, heavy, almost waxy odor if they're getting on a bit in age. Remember those precious stores we talked about? The ones that had to last until the first greens of spring well. Not everything lasts perfectly. Even with the best medieval efforts, there's a certain unavoidable heaviness in the air from these preserved victuals, a constant, subtle reminder of the ongoing fight against decay and the absolute necessity of the resources so carefully hoarded. It's not necessarily the smell of outright rot, not yet, but it's the definite scent of food that's been around for a while, patiently waiting. It's the scent of long keeping, of sustenance held precariously against the odds of a harsh season. And finally, weaving silently and persistently through all of these more aggressive, more identifiable aromas, there's the constant underlying scent of dampness. Those stone or wattle and daub walls we've seen, that packed earthen floor we've mentioned a few times, they all soak up moisture like a sponge, especially in a medieval winter with its fluctuating temperatures, its thaws and freezes, and the general lack of sophisticated damp-proofing courses or ventilation systems we take for granted. So, you have this cool, slightly mineral smell of wet earth, the slightly decaying, vegetal scent of damp rushes or straw on the floor if they haven't been changed in a good while and are slowly breaking down. There's a definite hint of mildew, perhaps emanating from corners that never quite see the sun or feel the direct heat of the fire. A bit like that forgotten corner of an old stone basement. It's a chill, clammy smell that seems to cling to the cold air itself, making the smoke feel heavier, the other odors more tenacious and cloying. This isn't the fresh, clean smell of summer rain on dry earth. It's the smell of things slowly, inexorably returning to the earth, but doing so inside your house. It's the quiet, persistent, almost melancholic bass note in your medieval winter potpourri that whispers of chill and slow decay. A subtle, damp blanket over everything, even by the struggling fire. So, you take that all in. The pervasive wood smoke, the close quarters animal scents, the unwashed human bodies, the aging preserved food, the ever-present dampness. It's quite the cocktail. Isn't it a rich, potent, and utterly unique bouquet that defines the medieval winter interior? It's the kind of smell that doesn't just enter your nose. It feels like it clings to you, gets into your hair, settles deep into the fibers of your clothes, perhaps even into your very soul after a few months. Ode to medieval winter. Top notes of despair, bass notes of old socks and desperation. And the truly wild part. This wasn't considered extraordinary or even particularly offensive by most. This was just the smell of home in winter. It's a universe away from our modern obsessions with scented candles, air fresheners, and eliminating every trace of natural odor. You'd probably need an industrial-strength Glade plug-in the size of a small dog to even make a dent in this atmosphere. But for the people living then, enduring these conditions, it was simply the air they breathed, day in and day out, as they focused on staying warm, staying fed, and simply making it through to the promise of spring. It's a powerful, almost visceral reminder of how profoundly different their sensory world was from our own. Now, as you sit there, perhaps metaphorically trying not to breathe too deeply through your nose, you might notice the way the limited light we've discussed interacts with all this palpable atmosphere. Right then, as the last sliver of weak winter daylight, that grayish smear we talked about, finally surrenders to the encroaching dark, you find yourself cocooned not just by walls and a hopefully sturdy roof, but by a whole universe of sound. It's an immersion. Really, you don't just hear these things, You feel them in your bones, in the very air you breathe. First and always, there's the wind. It's not just a gentle breeze, rustling leaves. Oh no, this is the north wind's audition tape for a death metal band. It howls, it shrieks, it claws at the wattle and daub, searching for any tiny imperfection, any loose thatch to tear into. You hear it whistle through the gaps around that ill-fitting door, a high-pitched, mournful cry that seems to carry all the desolation of the frozen landscape outside. Sometimes it drops to a low, guttural moan, like a giant beast circling your little refuge, sniffing for a way in. It's a constant pressure on your eardrums, a reminder of the wild, untamed world just inches away. You find yourself unconsciously tensing your shoulders every time a particularly violent gust slams against the walls, half expecting the whole structure to just give up and fly away to Oz. Good luck with those ruby slippers in a medieval winter. Then, closer, more intimate, is the fire. Ah, the fire. It's the beating heart of this confined world. You listen to its rhythmic crackle and pop, a comforting counterpoint to the wind's fury. Sparks dance and hiss, small explosions of light and sound that momentarily illuminate the smoky interior. A log shifts, settles, and a cascade of embers tumbles with a soft, sighing rush. Sometimes a piece of wood, still holding a bit of moisture, will sizzle and spit, a tiny angry protest before surrendering to the flames. It's a living sound. This fire, your main source of heat and light, and let's be honest, probably your main source of entertainment too. Now that Netflix is, well, several centuries away, this constant, gentle roar is the background music to your winter existence, the sound that lulls you into a fitful sleep and greets you in the dim morning. And the house itself, it talks. Oh, it speaks volumes. The timbers, those great wooden bones that hold everything together, they groan and creak under the relentless assault of the wind and the cold. It's like being inside an old wooden ship during a storm. Every shift in temperature, every particularly strong gust, elicits a response from the structure. A sharp crack from a roof beam overhead might make you jump, wondering if this is the moment the whole thing comes down. A slow, agonizing creak from a wall stud sounds like an old man easing into a chair. If that old man was also holding up several tons of snow, you become intimately familiar with these sounds, learning to distinguish the normal groans from the ones that might signal actual trouble. Some folks believed the tiny, persistent, ticking sound sometimes heard in old wood, which we now know is often the Death Watch beetle, was an omen of impending doom. Cheerful, right? It's a mainstream historical fact that many medieval homes, especially for the peasantry, were single-room affairs, so every sound the house made, everyone inside made, was shared, intimately. Now, let's add another layer to this auditory tapestry. The animals. Remember how we discussed bringing some of your more valuable livestock inside, or at least into an attached byre, during the harshest weather? Well, you can certainly hear them. Bessie the cow. If you're fortunate enough to own one, lets out a low, rumbling moo. Perhaps she's dreaming of green pastures, or maybe just complaining about the limited legroom. You might hear the snuffling and occasional oink of a pig, or the soft clucking and rustling of chickens, if they're cooped up nearby, their digestive processes, their size, their shifting movements. These are all part of your winter soundtrack. It's like having several very large, very smelly, and occasionally very vocal roommates who don't pay rent. Historians still argue whether the constant proximity to animal odors and sounds was perceived as a major hardship, contributing to illness, or if it was just an accepted, even comforting, part of the agricultural cycle for many. Perhaps a bit of both. The bleating of a lamb, the shuffling of hooves on the earthen floor, It all blends into the general hum. And then there are the human sounds. In these close, smoky quarters, shared with family, perhaps a servant or two, or even other families if the dwelling is larger, the sounds of humanity are inescapable. First and foremost, the coughing. Oh, the coughing. It's the medieval winter's greatest hit, played on repeat. A dry, hacking cough from one corner, a deep, chesty rattle from another. Someone trying to suppress a cough, which only makes it explode more violently. The air, thick with wood smoke from that central hearth we talked about. And, let's be frank, the aroma of unwashed bodies and damp wool does no favors for the lungs. Each cough is a small punctuation mark in the dimness, a reminder of the fragility of health. Beyond the coughs, you hear the subtler sounds of people existing together, the rustle of straw bedding as someone turns over, trying to find a more comfortable position on the floor or a simple pallet. A whispered conversation, words indistinct, but carrying the cadence of shared anxieties, or perhaps a bit of gossip. A child's whimper in the night, quickly shushed by a parent. The soft thud of someone's foot as they get up, perhaps to tend the fire, or step outside for a necessary and very brisk moment. You might hear the rhythmic scrape of a knife sharpening, or the dull thud of someone mending a tool even in the low light, and the snoring. Oh, the glorious multifaceted symphony of snores, from the delicate kitten-like purr to the full-blown timber-rattling hog-calling contest. You've got it all. Uncle Oswald over there sounds like he's trying to saw through a particularly stubborn log with his nose. Little Ilara whistles softly with each exhale. It's a rich tapestry of nasal obstructions and uvular vibrations, a testament to the deep, exhausted sleep of people who've worked hard and are now huddled together for warmth. And, well, because there's nowhere else to go. There might be the occasional sigh, a sound of weariness or contentment. It's hard to tell which. The scrape of a wooden bowl against a table, the slurp of someone finishing a meager sip of ale or watery broth. Even the sound of teeth grinding in sleep becomes a familiar note in this nocturnal opera. These aren't the sounds of solitude, even if you feel isolated from the wider world. They are the sounds of shared existence, of a community, however small, hunkered down together, waiting for the spring. It's a dense, layered soundscape, sometimes maddening, sometimes strangely comforting. You learn to filter, to find the familiar rhythms, the auditory landscape of your confined world becoming as known to you as the lines on your own hand. It's not quiet, not by a long shot, but it is your noise, the sound of survival in a medieval winter. And so hooked with the last of the autumn's bounty, like those precious nuts we talked about, safely stowed away. You feel the world outside shrink. The sun, that glorious calm life-giving orb, seems to be in a real hurry these days, barely peeking over the horizon before it decides, nah, too cold, I'm out, and dips back down, leaving you in a deepening twilight that starts well before your modern internal clock thinks it should. It's like the universe itself is hitting the snooze button. But for, daylight, you find yourself retreating, almost instinctively, like a snail pulling back into its shell, the heavy wooden door. Perhaps reinforced with some of those iron fittings we saw being forged. Thuds shut with a note of finality. It's not just keeping the cold out, it's sealing you in. The wind, which previously might have been a bracing companion on a brisk walk, now howls like a hungry wolf, a constant reminder of the formidable power just beyond your walls. You can hear it moaning around the eaves, testing the daub between the timbers, a relentless, chilling song. And the cold. Oh, it's a different beast now. It's not the crisp, energizing chill of autumn. This is a penetrating, bone-deep cold that seeps through every crack, every tiny imperfection in your shelter. You find yourself gravitating towards the hearth, that glowing heart of the home, almost as if pulled by an invisible string. Remember how vital that carefully stacked firewood was. Now you understand, viscerally. Outdoor activity grinds to a near halt. There are, of course, essential trips for water, or to check on any livestock if you have them. Quick, bundled up dashes into the biting air. But the leisurely strolls, the foraging, the extended work in the fields, those are distant memories, luxuries of a warmer season. The world outside is often a monochrome landscape of gray skies and frozen earth, or perhaps blinding white if snow has fallen. It's beautiful, in a stark, unforgiving way, but not particularly inviting for a picnic. So, your world contracts to the dimensions of your home. It becomes your universe for weeks, potentially months, on end. And what fills these long, fire-lit hours? Well, there's no Wi-Fi to go out, which, frankly, might be a blessing in disguise given the circumstances. Instead, it's a time for tasks that are both practical and, in their own way, meditative. Your hands are rarely still. Remember those tools we discussed, the ones carefully crafted and maintained. Now is the time for their upkeep. Axe heads might be resharpened with a patient, rhythmic scrape of stone against metal. Wooden handles, worn smooth with use, might be checked for splinters, perhaps re-oiled with a bit of animal fat. It's a quiet industry, illuminated by the flickering dance of flames. Clothing, too, demands attention. Those sturdy woolen garments take a beating, and this is the season for mending. You might sit, needle in hand, patching a tear in a tunic, darning a hole in a stocking. The repetitive motion of the needle, in and out, becomes almost a mantra. If you're fortunate, there's a loom in the corner, and the rhythmic clack, clack thump of weaving might fill the space, slowly transforming spun wool or flax, like we saw being processed, into precious cloth. Or perhaps it's spinning. The whir of the spindle, a gentle counterpoint to the crackling fire. As raw fibers are twisted into thread, it's a bit like those ASMR videos of people just making things, only with slightly higher stakes. Like, not freezing. Food preparation continues, albeit on a smaller scale. You might be grinding grain with a small hand quern, a surprisingly strenuous task for the day's bread or porridge, or perhaps sorting through dried beans, picking out any stones or chaff. It's a constant, low-level hum of domestic activity. Candle making, or the preparation of rushlights, is another crucial indoor task. You dip wicks into molten tallow or beeswax again and again, each layer adding a fraction of an inch, a few more precious minutes of light against the encroaching darkness. The desire for light in the darkest months was so profound. It's a mainstream historical fact that many winter festivals across cultures, like Saturnalia or Yule, centered around light and fire, symbols of hope and the sun's eventual return. But it's not all work. Work. The enforced proximity means this is also a time for community, at least within the household. With the day's chores hopefully winding down as the light completely fails, you gather closer to the fire. This is when stories are told, ancient myths, local legends, embellished tales of past adventures, or perhaps just the recounting of the day's very limited events. Children, wide-eyed in the firelight, absorb these narratives, learning the history and values of their people. Historians still argue whether these extended periods of indoor confinement truly fostered deeper familial and communal bonds, or if they simply led to a unique medieval form of cabin fever, punctuated by the occasional thrown wooden spoon. It's easy to imagine both being true, sometimes on the same day. Games might emerge, simple dice games, played with carved bone or wooden dice on a roughly drawn board, or perhaps a version of Nine Men's Morris. its lines scratched into a wooden plank, played with pebbles or dried beans. It's a way to pass the time, to engage the mind, to share a moment of lightheartedness in the gloom. Music, too, if there are instruments, a simple flute, a drum, or just voices raised in song. These aren't concert hall performances, but heartfelt expressions, filling the smoky air with sound. And there's a certain quiet rhythm to it all. The hiss and pop of the fire, the scrape of a knife whittling a piece of wood into a spoon or a toy, the soft murmur of voices, the occasional cough or sigh. You become acutely aware of the sounds of your own home, the sounds of the people you share it with. A quirky, lesser-known tidbit from some regions was the belief in house spirits, or brownies, who, if treated well perhaps with a small offering of food left by the hearth, would help with unseen chores during the night. If you neglected them, well, things might just go missing, or tasks would mysteriously undo themselves. So, you're extra careful not to spill your gruel, just in case. The very air you breathe is thick with the smells of winter domesticity. Wood smoke. Of course, a constant, comforting aroma. Perhaps the scent of simmering stew, or baking bread if you're lucky. The faint, earthy smell of stored roots from the cellar. The slightly musty scent of wool and damp leather. It's an olfactory tapestry that defines this indoor existence. You find your body adjusting to this slower, more constrained pace. There's a sense of waiting, of biding time until the light returns, until the world outside unfreezes and life can spill out of doors once more. But for now, this small fire-lit space is your everything. It's where you work, eat, sleep, and connect. Your entire existence condensed into the shelter you've so carefully prepared. You're not just surviving the winter, you're living it in a way that is intensely focused and deeply human. The days may be short, but the nights and the indoor hours are long and full. And so, as the days grow shorter and that biting wind, remember the one we talked about howling around the less than perfectly sealed window shutters, really starts to make its presence known. Something else inevitably arrives. You feel it first as a tickle in your throat, a certain heaviness behind your eyes. Winter, you see, isn't just about cozy fires and hoping your meager stores of preserved food, like those dried apples we discussed, will last. Oh no, it's also prime time for what your ancestors would have simply called the ag, or the room, or any number of wonderfully descriptive terms for the misery of being unwell. You find yourself huddled indoors, much like everyone else. Those close quarters, which seemed almost companionable during the autumn evenings, now take on a slightly more potent atmosphere. Every shared breath in that smoky, often damp, interior space becomes a potential carrier. It's a bit like being in a modern office during flu season, except your office is also your bedroom, kitchen, and living room, and your colleagues are your entire family, and possibly a few assorted farm animals if things are particularly rustic. The cold itself is, of course, a major suspect in everyone's mind. You feel the chill seep into your bones, and it's only natural to connect that pervasive, inescapable cold with the cough that soon racks your chest, or the shivers that have nothing to do with the draft from the door. We understand now that it's more about viruses thriving in certain conditions and our immune systems perhaps being a bit stressed. But for you, in this moment, the cold is the culprit. Plain and simple. The symphony of sickness begins. First, it's a distant cough from across the room, then a sniffle nearby. Soon, it seems everyone is participating. You hear the wet, hacking coughs, the dry rasping ones that echo unsettlingly in the quiet of a long winter night. You see the pale faces, the watery eyes, the general air of listless discomfort. Chills run up and down your spine. Even when you're bundled in every scratchy woolen garment you own, your head feels heavy, stuffed with cotton, and the simple act of breathing through your nose becomes a distant, cherished memory. It's a universal experience, this seasonal onslaught. Imagine the shared misery, the communal sigh of resignation as the first real wave of winter sickness makes its rounds. There's a certain grim camaraderie to it. Everyone equally susceptible, everyone equally uncomfortable. The air grows thick, not just with wood smoke, but with the very essence of shared germs. Lovely. Now, what do you do about it? You can't just pop a Dayquil and power through your Netflix queue. The remedies available are, well, they're creative. I'll give them that. Resourcefulness, remember, was the name of the game. Whether it was stretching food supplies or battling a persistent cough. So, your mother, or the village elder, or whoever fancies themselves the local medical expert, will likely have a few tricks up their sleeve. Most of these treatments are based on centuries of tradition, and let's be honest, a healthy dose of hope, and not a lot of what we'd call scientific evidence. The prevailing medical theory for a very long time, as you might know, was humoral theory. The idea that your body's health depended on the balance of four fluids: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. A cold naturally was often seen as an excess of cold, wet phlegm. So the cures aim to counteract this, perhaps by warming you, drying you out, or encouraging you to expel the offending substance. You might be offered a steaming tisane of various herbs. Some, like horehound or coltsfoot, were indeed popular for coughs for centuries and might have had a mild soothing effect on a sore throat. Others, well, their inclusion might be more puzzling. You could find yourself sipping a brew that tastes vaguely of earth and disappointment. Or perhaps a poultice will be prepared. Imagine a warm, damp concoction of bread, milk, and strong-smelling herbs, or even something more adventurous like roasted onions or mustard, slapped onto your chest and bound tightly. The idea is to draw out the sickness, or at least make you feel like something significant is being done. The heat itself probably felt comforting, even if the underlying science was, shall we say, aspirational, one rather specific, and perhaps a bit startling. Lesser-known tidbit is the historical use of things like boiled snails or slugs in syrup for chest complaints. Yes, you heard that right. Apparently, the slime was thought to be soothing. I'll just let you ponder the texture of that particular remedy for a moment. Suddenly, that grape-flavored cough syrup doesn't seem so bad, does it? The effectiveness of these treatments is, to put it mildly, debatable. While some herbal remedies might have offered slight symptomatic relief, a bit of decongestion from a strong menthol-like herb, or a sedative effect from another, they weren't tackling the root cause, the virus. It's a bit like trying to fix a leaky roof by rearranging the buckets inside. You're managing the symptoms, not the problem. Historians still argue whether the perceived benefits of many old folk remedies were primarily due to the placebo effect, the natural course of the illness simply resolving itself, or if some ingredients possessed unrecognized mild pharmacological properties that offered genuine, albeit limited moral relief. It's tricky because, without controlled studies, it's all anecdotal, and when you're feeling wretched, you'll try almost anything, won't you? If someone swears by wearing a sock filled with garlic around their neck, and you're desperate enough, you might just give it a go. At the very least, it would keep other people at a comfortable social distance, which, ironically, might actually help prevent further spread. A little accidental epidemiology, perhaps. And so, you endure. You sip your strange teas. You tolerate the pungent poultices, and you cough along with everyone else. There's a certain resignation to it. Illness was simply a more visible, more accepted part of life, especially in winter. You didn't expect a miracle cure. You just hoped to get through it without it turning into something worse, like pneumonia, which was often a death sentence. It's a humbling thought, especially when we get frustrated that our modern cold remedies only mask symptoms for a few hours. At least our ineffective cure-at remedies taste a bit better now, and generally don't involve garden pests. Mostly. And so, with the day's tasks, like that endless mending, or the hopeful, if somewhat optimistic, setting of snares we discussed, finally behind you, the world outside shrinks, as dusk fully claims the sky. And that meager supper, remember the one with surprisingly persistent root vegetable that tasted vaguely of disappointment, and earth settles in your stomach. The inside of your simple dwelling becomes your entire universe. The air grows cooler, but the hearth, if you're fortunate enough to have one that draws well, pushes back with a welcome, smoky warmth. The flickering light from that fire, or perhaps a tiny, sputtering oil lamp that smells faintly of whatever animal fat is burning, casts enormous Dirtcenter dancing shadows on those rough, uneven walls. Those same walls we talked about earlier that might, or might not, be entirely successful at keeping out the more determined drafts, or, small, inquisitive wildlife. It's here, in this enclosed, often crowded, undeniably intimate space, that the real social life, the indoor edition, truly begins to unfold. You find yourself gathered close with your family. Maybe a few neighbors huddled in for shared warmth and company. Perhaps you're seated on rough-hewn benches that have known generations of use, or simply on the packed earth floor, cushioned by a worn animal hide if you're among the more comfortable. Its scent, a familiar part of the home's olfactory signature. There's a hush that falls, not an empty silence, but one filled with anticipation. Someone, perhaps an elder whose face is a roadmap of wrinkles, each one a story in itself, and whose voice, though perhaps thinned by age, carries the gravitas of experience, begins to spin a tale. It might be a story passed down through countless retellings, a foundational myth explaining the creation of the world, the cheeky antics of the gods, or why the moon waxes and wanes. Or it could be a local legend, full of familiar landmarks and uncanny happenings, designed to both entertain and caution. Sometimes, it's a heroic epic of ancestors whose exploits grow a little grander, a little more embellished with each narration, their bravery more dazzling, their enemies more fearsome. You listen, rapt, as monsters with too many eyes are slain in a single heroic blow. As star-crossed lovers meet in secret trysts under impossible circumstances, and as cunning tricksters, often small and seemingly powerless, outwit the large, the foolish, and the powerful. There are no Dolby Atmos surround sound systems here. No 4K resolution, just the incredible power of the human voice, the subtle shift in tone, the occasional dramatic gesture, a hand slicing through the air to denote a sword, and your own imagination working overtime to paint the scenes in vivid detail. It's like a live-action podcast, but with a significantly higher chance that the storyteller's great-great-grandparent actually knew, the person who supposedly wrestled that giant badger, and then, perhaps, as the fire crackles and spits, the energy of the stories might give way to the softer embrace of songs. Don't expect chart-topping hits or auto-tuned perfection. Think more of the heart's own music. A mother, her movements weary but gentle, hums a lullaby to a fretful child nestled in her arms. A melody so ancient its origins are lost to the mists of time, yet its power to soothe remains undiminished. Or maybe someone, with a voice surprisingly strong and clear, strikes up a work song, even though the day's labor is done, its familiar rhythm and call and response a comfort, a reminder of shared effort. Other voices join in, some bold and true, others more hesitant, a little off-key, but all blending together in harmonies that might be simple by our complex musical standards, but are deeply felt, resonating in the small space. These aren't songs downloaded from a vast digital library. They live in the breath, the memory, and the collective heart of the community. It's a mainstream historical fact that in many pre-literate societies, songs and epic poems were absolutely vital for preserving history, genealogies, cultural norms, and even practical knowledge about farming or healing, functioning much like an oral encyclopedia set to music. Imagine trying to remember complex legal precedents based on a catchy tune. Actually, that sounds more effective than some textbooks I've waded through. If the mood is lighter, or if the younger members of the household are still buzzing with an energy that defies the late hour, simple games might emerge. You won't find elaborate board games with 1,000 tiny, easily lost plastic pieces and a rulebook thicker than your thumb. No, think more along the lines of knucklebones, an ancient and widespread game played with the cleaned and polished ankle bones of sheep or goats, tossed and caught in various complex patterns, a bit like a more organic version of jacks, or perhaps dice, painstakingly carved from bone, wood, or even antler, their spotted faces full of portent, their outcomes whispered over with fervent hopes or muttered frustrations as they clatter onto a flattened piece of leather or a smooth patch of floor. Maybe it's a guessing game, a series of riddles passed around the circle, designed to pass the time and sharpen the wit. What has an eye but cannot see, the question might hang in the smoky air. Historians still argue whether these games were purely for leisure and a bit of friendly competition, or if they also served a more profound, didactic purpose, to teach basic mathematics through scoring, strategy through simple game theory, or even to subtly reinforce social hierarchies based on who consistently won or lost with grace, or perhaps with a bit too much gloating. It's fascinating to think that a simple roll of those hand-carved dice could carry such layers of meaning, and here's a quirky, lesser-known tidbit for you. One of the oldest known board games is the royal game of discovered in ancient Mesopotamia and dating back to around 2600 BCE. We found the boards, exquisitely inlaid, and the playing pieces, but the exact rulebook, sadly, didn't make it. Scholars have made some very educated guesses, reconstructing playable versions. So, you know, if you ever unearth a 4,500-year-old game board in your backyard, the original instructions are probably just, figure it out. Try not to enrage the gods with your poor sportsmanship, and definitely don't lose to your cousin who always cheats. Beyond the more structured forms of entertainment, like stories, songs, and games, there's the simple yet absolutely vital art of conversation. This is where the community truly breathes, where its pulse can be felt. News, if any has trickled in from a neighboring village, perhaps carried by a rare traveler or a kinsman who braved the uncertain paths, worries about the coming winter, the prospects for the harvest, the health of the livestock, the movements of game in the forest. These are shared, dissected, and collectively pondered. Plans are quietly made for the next day's hunt, for a repair to a communal fence. Disputes, if they arise, are perhaps aired and gently mediated by the elders, their wisdom sought to maintain the delicate balance of the group. And yes, gossip, of course, because some human tendencies are truly timeless. Who's been seen casting lingering glances at whom? Whose new pot is said to be a marvel of craftsmanship, and whose is rumored to leak like a sieve. It's the original, uncurated social media feed delivered in hushed tones around the flickering fire, with instant, real-time community feedback. You share the small events of your day, your observations, your minor triumphs, your nagging fears. You listen. Really listen. Because what else is there to do? And because the information shared can be crucial. This isn't just idle chatter designed to fill silence. It's the very sinew that binds the family and the small community unit together. It's how you learn the unspoken rules of your society, the expectations, the shared values, the collective wisdom accumulated over generations. The older generations impart knowledge, not through formal, dry lessons, but woven into the fabric of their speech, embedded in the examples of their anecdotes, in the sighs that punctuate certain memories. The younger ones absorb it all, sometimes by choice, sometimes simply because they are present, soaking it in like the dry earth soaks up a rare rain. It's a far cry from a modern family dinner, where everyone might be present physically but mentally miles away, each staring at their own personal glowing rectangle. Isn't it, though? To be entirely fair, a well-stoked hearth fire is also a rather mesmerizing glowing rectangle, just one that requires more manual input and offers a distinct aroma of, well, burning wood. This indoor social life, you slowly come to realize as you observe the flickering firelight on faces around you, is profoundly important. In a world with few external distractions, especially after the sun has set, or during the long, confining days of harsh weather, these human connections are not just pleasant, they are essential. The home, however humble, isn't just a physical shelter from the elements. It's the crucible where relationships are forged, tested, and maintained. It is the primary school of life, where you learn who you are, who your people are, and how to navigate the complexities of your shared world. The shared laughter that erupts at a well-told joke, the comfortable, shared silences that need no filling, the collective sighs of understanding or concern, even the occasional, quickly resolved arguments, they all weave an intricate tapestry of belonging. It's an intensely human experience, raw and unfiltered. You're not curating a persona for an unseen online audience. You're just there, key, present, in all your unadorned reality, with your family, your close neighbors, the people who truly share your immediate, tangible world. The sense of shared experience, of relying on one another, not just for physical survival, but for emotional sustenance, for mental stimulation, for the sheer comfort of company, is palpable in the close air of the dwelling. It's a stark, and perhaps poignant, contrast to the often isolating nature of much modern entertainment, where we can be surrounded by the illusion of connection, yet feel profoundly alone, each lost in our own customized digital stream. Here, the stream is shared, and its currents are felt by everyone in the room. You feel it, don't you? That deep, bone-settled weariness that only a truly protracted winter can instill. It's like your very soul has been stuck in low-power mode, conserving energy, just waiting. Remember all those weeks, those seemingly endless nights we've wandered through together on this journey. Each one felt a little like adding another heavy blanket, until you're just existing under the weight of it all. The psychological toll is real. It's not just the cold, though that certainly seeps into your thoughts, making them sluggish. It's the gray, the relentless, monotonous gray sky that presses down, day after day. You find yourself staring out the window, not really seeing anything, just feeling that dull ache of longing for something more, for color, for light, for the sheer, unadulterated joy of not needing 3 layers just to fetch the mail, which, let's be honest, is probably just more bills or an ad for a snowblower you now deeply resent. You've probably scrolled through approximately 10,000 hours of streaming content, haven't you? Your algorithm now thinks you're exclusively interested in documentaries about obscure artisanal cheesemakers in remote, snowbound villages, or perhaps competitive ice sculpting. It's a coping mechanism. This digital hibernation. Anything to distract from the fact that the sun seems to be playing a cruel game of hide and seek. And mostly, it's just hiding. That feeling of enduring. It's a quiet strength, isn't it? It's not dramatic, not a heroic last stand, but a persistent, almost grudging resilience. You just keep putting one foot in front of the other, metaphorically speaking. Because actually going outside requires an elaborate suiting up ritual that rivals an astronaut's pre-launch checklist. But then, something shifts. It's almost imperceptible at first. Maybe the quality of the light changes for a fleeting moment in the late afternoon, a little less harsh, a touch more golden. Or you hear a bird. Not the usual hardy winter crow, but something different. A tentative, hopeful chirp. Could it be? You almost don't dare to believe it. We've had those false springs, haven't we? Those cruel teases where the temperature climbs. You excitedly pack away your heaviest coat, and then, bam, another foot of snow. It's nature's little practical joke. Classic. The anticipation, though. Once it takes root, it's a powerful thing. It starts as a tiny spark, this hope for warmer days. You find yourself daydreaming about the scent of damp earth, the vivid green of new leaves unfurling, the simple pleasure of feeling sunshine on your skin without a pane of glass in between. It's funny how quickly we forget the biting winds when the first brave crocus pokes its head through the thawing ground. It's like a tiny purple and yellow flag of rebellion against winter's tyranny. Historically, this longing for spring, this endurance through winter, it's a shared human experience, baked into our very DNA. Think about ancient agricultural societies. Their entire existence revolved around these cycles. The end of winter wasn't just a mood lift, it was survival. The return of warmth meant the return of food, of life. Spring festivals, celebrated for millennia across countless cultures, are all about this very feeling: relief, renewal, and a giant, collective exhale. Even the much-debated daylight saving time, first widely implemented by Germany and Austria-Hungary on April 30th, 1916, was initially about conserving coal during wartime by extending daylight into the evening. But it inadvertently tapped into that primal desire for more light in our waking hours, tricking our brains into feeling like spring's promise is a little closer. And the little quirks of enduring. People have always found ways. Did you know that in some medieval European traditions, people would carry specific herbs, like rosemary or thyme, believing they could ward off the winter melancholy, or even protect against plague, which they often associated with bad airs more prevalent in colder, closed-off conditions, a sort of aromatic multi-tool, if you will. Modern science might focus on vitamin D, but who are we to judge the power of a fragrant sprig? If a bit of rosemary in your pocket got you through February in a drafty, unlit cottage, it did its job. Historians still argue whether pre-modern people truly experienced what we now term seasonal affective disorder with the same psychological framework, or if their lives, so intrinsically tied to the relentless demands of the seasons, fostered different coping mechanisms and perceptions of winter's gloom, where perhaps the immediate struggle for survival overshadowed more subtle mood shifts. You start to notice the small changes in your own habits, the urge to open a window, even if it's still a bit brisk, just to let that fresh air, that different air, sweep through the stale confines of your winter den. Remember how we talked about those enclosed spaces, those darker paths on our journey? This feels like emerging, blinking, into a clearing. You might even feel a sudden, inexplicable desire to clean, to sort, to shed the accumulated detritus of winter. Both physical and mental, it's the nesting instinct in reverse. Instead of hunkering down, you're preparing to unfurl, even if it means finally tackling that pile of things I'll sort out when I have more energy. Which, ironically, winter never provides. The hope for warmer days becomes more tangible. It's not just an abstract concept anymore. You can almost taste it. You picture picnics you're not sure you'll actually go on, walks in parks that are currently muddy expanses, wearing clothes that are still vacuum packed away under your bed. But the imagining itself is a balm. It's the promise that the world will be vibrant again, that the effort of enduring, of simply getting through, has been worth it. The trees, stark and skeletal for so long, will soon be dressed in their finest, most ridiculously optimistic green. The rivers, like that icy one we imagined crossing some time ago, will flow freely, no longer constrained by winter's crystalline grip. This feeling, this slow, cautious unfurling towards a spring, it's a testament to the cyclical nature of things. Just as we've journeyed through darkness and cold, sometimes quite literally in our mind's eye these past sessions, we now sense the approach of light and warmth. It's a reminder that even the longest, most challenging phases eventually give way to renewal. The psychological weight begins to lift, almost imperceptibly at first, like that early morning mist burning off to reveal a brighter sky. You find a little more spring in your step, a little less sigh in your breath. The world, which seemed so stubbornly monochrome, is slowly, surely, preparing to burst back into technicolor. And you, dear traveler, are ready for it. You've endured, you've waited, and now the promise of spring feels not just like a hope, but an imminent, well-deserved reward for simply holding on. And so, as the very last echoes of our shared journey begin to soften, and the promise of that gentle, approaching spring whispers more clearly now, you can feel the tension easing from your shoulders. The path ahead seems a little brighter, doesn't it? The air, a little sweeter. Let the weariness of the long winter, and perhaps the weariness of our long travels together, melt away like the last patches of snow in the strengthening sun. Allow yourself to drift now, carried on the faintest, mildest breeze, towards a place of quiet rest. The stories have been told, the shadows have retreated, and all that remains is the soft, gentle hum of a world stirring, ever so slowly, towards a new dawn. Sleep well.